Elijah.
Hello.
Good to see you. Thanks for chatting with me today.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to talk today mostly about social media and other technology, and feel free to think about technology as expansively as you like. But before we get into all of that, but for anyone listening who doesn't know who you are or your work, can you tell me how you developed your interest in culture and storytelling, or how you would like to describe your passions?
Yes, well, I love this introduction. Very delicious to just dive in. But for those joining, hello, beautiful people of the world. I am Elijah McKinnon. I use they, them pronouns, and I am the co-founder and executive director of Open Television. I describe myself as a strategist, entrepreneur, and visionary from the future, residing here on Earth with you all. And, you know, my interest in culture and storytelling really started with my family. I was raised by a partnerless parent who navigated the world with both resilience and softness. And I learned early on that stories weren't just entertainment. I think that they were holding the capabilities of being, yes, delicious, right? But they also had this nutrition in there that cultivated space for survival, legacy, and connection. And so, whether it was around the dinner table or through old photo albums and mixtapes or in the kitchen as we learned about recipes, I became obsessed with how we pass knowledge, how we relish in joy, and how identity has the ability to move across generations. That foundation shaped, I think, everything I know about storytelling and really was a conduit for the ways in which I approach my work as a truth teller, from campaigns to communication strategies to any of my entrepreneurial ventures. There's always a huge, rich storytelling component. And if you've ever worked with me, I'm always trying to spin some type of narrative that is rooted in clarity and and nuance. And so I think that's my intro into storytelling. I think we got there.
I think we got there. Yeah, I love that answer. I love the allegory and also material calling in of like food as a way through storytelling, but also storytelling as something that is nourishing. I mean, I don't want to spill too much of your tea, but you are also an incredible chef and has cooked some of the most delicious meals I've had in my life. So it is something, it's a practice that you live on and like live through in multiple ways and multiple levels. And so I just love everything about that answer and the way that intergenerational and ancestral history is kind of passed through you, through stories, and live on through you is so beautiful. I want to talk about the the vehicle of storytelling called social media because, like you said, stories are everywhere, and they are proliferating online through social media. What is your origin story with social media? I mean, you mentioned campaigns. Part of your work is about social media, but like even before you realized it was like a job, can you remember when you realized the power of this technology to tell stories?
Yeah, I love this calling in of memory. I feel like my social media origin story is rooted in contradiction, one of power and precarity living, I think, side by side. Um, I came up as an adult in San Francisco during the height of the tech boom, between 2010 and 2015, which was absolute madness, right? It was quite lawless. There weren't really any regulations. It was just like everyone was trying different things. And I think what was really interesting about being in San Francisco is that there were a lot of like geographical sort of testing and piloting that was happening like in San Francisco on the user base there that would then kind of go out into the world. So I think we were quite literally living in a bubble and you could feel that shift happening in real time. Social media was becoming this new public square. It was like a battleground of some sorts. And I felt like I could spot that social media was becoming the actual billboard, right? Like that was the space that you would go out and canvas with. And it really excited me and it helped me while being in university, like switch my focus to just really being engaged in new media in a way that felt transformative. And it felt like a vehicle for me to also find more of my identity. Um, I don't think I had the language for who I was at that time fully, but I knew that there was a window that I was getting closer to opening by pursuing that thread. And that awareness deepened when I moved to Chicago and I co-created and starred in a revolutionary campaign called Prep for Love, one of the first and largest citywide HIV prevention campaigns that centered intimacy and pleasure. It was a bold move, I think, for one, the city and also a legacy AIDS foundation to center that type of storytelling in a campaign that had a huge social media focus. And, this was around 2016, 2017 when we were launching, and it was incredibly sex positive. It was rooted in joy, and it also centered Black queer bodies, Black trans bodies in a way that the world just had never seen before on a global scale. And it came at a cost. It came at a huge cost in terms of my sanity and my safety. I received many different death threats. I was doxxed multiple times. And I saw firsthand how social media could be this double-edged sword for people who look like me and who dare to be visible. And so when I transitioned into, I think, just cultivating deeper, like uh, braver practices on how to protect myself, I then began to think about like, well, what are the other sides of this, right? Like like this was really painful and this was really harmful and just deeply scary, right? It was really, really scary. It was terrifying. Um, at that time, I was moving through a relationship that was also quite public, and it was rooted and connected to the storytelling component. We were in a serodiscordant relationship. My partner was HIV positive, I was HIV negative, and through social media, we were able to tell our story, which again, generationally speaking, wasn't something that was happening in our age. We saw this in a lot of different older couples who had been in serodiscordant relationships. And so it helped to develop this intergenerational, cross-cultural language around love, care, and health that I just don't think if we didn't have social media, we would have been able to like literally last in a relationship with all of this like noise happening around us and having elders and Arkansas or in Vancouver or Germany or wherever kind of reaching out to us to be like, listen, like we see you, we understand what you're doing, we're here for you, and these conversations that you're sparking and the ways in which you're shifting narratives, like that is actually how we get free. And yeah, so on both ends, chaos, madness, but my origin story isn't, I think, about going viral. It's about the risks we take to tell the truth online,
Mhm.
right? What that comes with and how there are radical possibilities, I think, on both sides.
That was amazing. You kind of got to my next two questions, but I think we can dive in deeper because you started your statement by talking about realizing that social media was both this public square and also battleground. Like, and you said it kind of like right there in between, like they're both at the same time. And people don't talk about it, but the public square kind of was a dangerous place. It is a very brave thing to like stand in public and say, this is who I am and this is what I believe. Um, and yet we have this idea that social media is this place where we can have kind of this intimate connection as well. That isn't necessarily what we associate with the public square, but also might have its own form of, risk. So I'm curious for you, like, when for you has social media or how has social media advanced collective action and storytelling? Prep for Love, I think you talked about what the campaign was, but there were impacts to that. I mean, it was part of a campaign for Illinois to like, what was it, like getting to zero, right? To actually like end HIV in Illinois, or like the growth of new cases, I guess. So I'm imagining that you've seen the power of this storytelling manifest in your own work and also in just what you've seen in the world.
Totally. And I love that invitation to dive deeper. I think I'm a strategist at my core. So I'm always in any type of communication effort going to take a social approach to all of my work. I'm going to think about where does this live and how is this going to translate online because my entire, adulthood, I came up online in the public, right? I learned how to be an adult in the public. I made many mistakes online in the public. And I think for me, social media is a tool for movement building. It is a tool for storytelling, and it is a tool for cultural organizing. And Prep for Love it had all of those things. And I think that's what made it so successful. And so yes, it was this game-changing, multi-award winning, highly adapted campaign that, was anchored and centered in Illinois. It was the first $1 million campaign I had worked on. It was such a child. I don't know why they let me, but that's why they let me, right? Because they were like, what is actually happening in this world and where to find people, right? Like posters and flyers are not going to do it, right? For this particular generation. And really what I think made that such a game changing um, initiative is that it married both this social practice of like engaging and meeting people where they are with the research needed to actually track and help change policy, right, increase the visibility of particular type of health interventions, and also I think just culturally speaking, like have the people, right, who are most impacted centered at the core of the decisions that are being made around their health. And that to me, like with that recipe and seeing it come together online, I think was what made it truly revolutionary. But yeah, it was super successful. I mean, we saw the general goal of the campaign was to spread awareness around PrEP, which was, I mean, the data on that was like wild. I mean, it's been many years. I know it's definitely increased, but just the initial calls that were received around making appointments at different clinics to just like learn about PrEP, the ways in which it helped to move and shape policy, which then unlocked multiple dollars to state funding to be able to extend the life of the campaign, the way in which different clinics around the city and the state of Illinois were able to get a boost in funding because they were able to see that people were actually engaging in this campaign in a way. It was one of the longest running campaigns. I think that campaign ran for like 4 or 5 years and technically is still running. I designed, we were chatting recently, a Prep for Teens campaign over 2 years ago where we did the same strategy, right? We brought in teens, we hosted think tanks, and we said, what is the social first strategy that you will use, right? Like I was a millennial, these things may not work for you, right? So what are the ways in which you want to engage? And so there are just so many, I think, really amazing things that social media can do when you marry it with the variety of ingredients. I think that when you just approach it from like, what is the thing that's going to go viral or going to, get the most eyes on it, and you don't have a really true understanding of like what the action is or where you are trying to mobilize people toward, that's when I think it becomes really challenging and dangerous because it's left up for interpretation.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, I love that answer. And I love, the answer to the question of when for has social media advanced collective action and storytelling, it's like when it's not just about the social media, actually, right? When it's about the action that you take after you see it on social media and also the things that you do around the social media, from research to policy to all the amazing pop-ups that Prep Love had. Like there was like live music and there were gatherings in churches and it was a fully multimodal, robust, hyper local, but also global campaign. And it's like that mixture, to use the food ingredient, like all those ingredients that make the recipe for the dish that people want to consume. And I think maybe that's where people get tripped up with social media and collective action and storytelling, is that they're so focused on what's the post. And it's like, well, what comes after the post? What comes around the post? And maybe that is because, as you started your comments, you grew up on social media publicly. You kind of learned very early that it's not the end all be all, right?
Right.
Whereas I think some of the elder millennials and the older folks who are just so transfixed by it, maybe get a little too wrapped up in the object itself and not in like how are people actually connecting with your story in multiple levels, in multiple ways. So that was kind of the public square piece. I do want to talk about the battleground piece as well. I mean, you already talked about, the threats to privacy and safety that are particularly acute for Black, Brown, queer, trans people, et cetera, women. So we can talk about that. I'm just curious in general, like how are platforms, do you think, not serving either your work or the work you want to see in the world or your communities in the present moment?
Yeah, I'm going to answer that question, but I want to come back to the last question because I think on the other side of this, like I think about a project like Brave Futures, right, which is a 48-hour film program that began online, right? We simply asked a question, what do brave futures look like? And that was quite literally left into interpretation. That was before a program was attached to it. That was before we had, designed a whole strategy to scaffold out into, a global program. And the questions, or excuse me, the answers that we received because of that question is what has helped us source stories from around the world because that question is meant to be left up into interpretation. It is meant for you to see yourself inside of it. And it is meant to cultivate a curiosity for developing a visual archive that is rooted in resistance, joy, and possibility. And so I think that there are like ways for like that interpretation to be left up for good and like to really truly engage in um, practices that are able to be scaffolded. Like I said before, this program just from that question has been able to you know, be toured to 7 different countries. We've mobilized 300 artists. We've moved hundreds and thousands of dollars to cultivate, infrastructure in specific cities that are typically overlooked because they're not film markets or film hubs. And we've produced 40 films, right? And that starts from one question. That was not the goal, though. And so I do think that on the other side of this, like, there are ways in which, when you approach social media with intention and you approach it with the reality that it is a tool, right?
Mhm.
It is a tool to be utilized in service of something else. There are, deep, deep, expansive possibilities. And
Um,
so, oh yeah,
Were you going to answer the next question? Because I just
I
want
was.
to, yeah,
Mhm.
I just want to highlight for folks who don't know, Brave Futures is a program that Elijah created that is distributed on OTV, that is a 48-hour short film race, but also other forms of production, grassroots production that has happened in Mexico, South Africa, in Joburg and Cape Town, right? Across Europe, UK, Germany, across the United States. Oh, and Brazil most recently. You just kind of said 7 countries, and I just want to be like, I want y'all to imagine Elijah is popping up literally around the world, helping people tell their stories and then giving them a global audience. And just like big props to that like, kind of revolutionary program and a testament to the power of trusting people with their own story, right? And but giving them a framework to tell their story so that they feel safe telling their story, I think is so key. It's like not just like, hey, tell your story, but like actually here's a prompt, here's something to think about, here's something to like chew into. And I think that is a useful framework for thinking about social media as a tool for collective action when like you hold people, right? You hold
Right.
their stories with care. Yeah. But the next question was the battleground. And
Yeah.
the platforms are challenging.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is like we're in I think, a really challenging space when it comes to these platforms because there isn't a standardized approach to like how we're even having conversations around these platforms, what they are intended to do, how we are utilizing them. And I think that there's a beauty in that because then it is left up for your own device to just navigate and move through the platforms as you need them, but then on the other hand that then opens the door for chaos and turmoil, danger, harm, and trauma. And so like that's the contradiction that I think we live in as a society inside of a world of social media. And so when I think of the ways in which I and the communities that I'm a part of and belong to are not being served through this present moment, I'm thinking about the individuals and platforms and conglomerates that are prioritizing profit over people, right? Most platforms continue to prioritize algorithms that push ad revenue, and really, I think, just dismantle meaningful connection, which was the original goal, right? Which I think, quite literally to be a contradiction, and I love. This leaves, I think, independent storytellers, creators, especially those, as you mentioned, queer, trans, BIPOC, disabled folks, Native folks, people who I think crave visibility for safety and security and resources towards accessing systems that weren't built for them. It leaves them in despair, right? Because they're exposed and they're vulnerable. I think that gatekeeping, access and opportunity is something that is persistent in a disconnected society, especially when you have grassroots ecosystems that, you know, thrive on getting their messages out and thrive on cultivating communities that serve as hubs for those messages to be disseminating while claiming to support diversity and different types of storytelling. Really, that's just a way for them to extract, right? That's really the goal. And I think that those extractive relationships have then spilled over into the creator economy because it's like, well, if you're going to extract from me, I'm going to extract from you. And now we're just extracting, right? Like
Mm.
now it's just a vicious cycle. And it's something that I'm not even like I'm not mad at because I'm like, yeah, like this is the way that the system has been quite literally co-opted to move and function as. And it's like up to the storytellers, the creators, the artists to, kill or be killed, right? And it's a horrible way to move in a world. And it's a horrible way to try to get your story told. But the way in which the system's designed doesn't really cultivate, there's no space for anything else in between. There's no gray area. And so I think our communities are expected to pour out innovation and authenticity and vulnerability, but we rarely receive the infrastructure to thrive, right? We rather receive the benefit of us doing all that labor. I think about Black Twitter, right? And the fact that even with, you know, X that shall not be named, right? Black Twitter is still popping on there, right? It's not even named Twitter anymore, and it's still popping as Black Twitter. And most of Black Twitter has, left, and it still exists. It still exists, and that lets you know how rich the cultural landscape is. And then I think the final piece for me is just like the lack of imagination around impact. I think that we live in this like viral economy that tends to treat content as disposable instead of transformational. And so I think when I'm looking at OTV and the work that we're doing, we believe that stories should not just be watched, right? They should be felt, they should be discussed, and they should activate some type of mobilization inside of your body, right? Whether that to be, I'm gonna go curse out my cousin Larry because cousin Larry was being transphobic, and I just realized that that's what it was, and that's why I felt weird in my body. All the way to when I get up in these ballots, right? I know that I cannot go that way because that is harmful for X, Y, and Z. And I think platforms rarely offer pathways for storytelling to turn into community building or
Mm.
movement work or healing justice, right? That's just not the goal when profit is so prevalent.
Ooh, you just said a word. And you answered my next question as well, because I was going to ask, what challenges thinkers, organizers, cultural producers interested in these kinds of culturally specific, diverse stories that OTV platforms in social media, and you kind of named it. It is the kind of capitalist bent of everything that makes people competitive, but also is extractive, right? So, like, they want you being your authentic self because then you're easier to target for advertising. And then that also makes you visible to the people that you view as your competition, right? So that you always try to one up them. And then and then you're generating engagement, right? And this is like the love-hate relationship that I have with Black Twitter, where there are things that I think Black Twitter that come out of Black Twitter that are absolutely brilliant and help me see the world differently. And then I also see like just like pointless shade and catfighting and negativity and like sometimes low-key anti-blackness in Black Twitter or whatever, or queer phobia or whatever, like everyone wants to have their takes, so they kind of get a one-up on somebody. And, for the platforms like OTV that are like, well, actually, I'm not trying to have us fight and compete. I'm actually just trying to help us love each other. Like, that's just not as sexy. It doesn't generate as much engagement for whatever reason on platforms. Not, I mean, sometimes it does, but like, it's kind
Sure.
of like you're going against the grain a little
Yeah.
bit. Um, so I'm curious then, how do we fight that? How can we develop practices, protocols, or platforms that motivate people to share stories and knowledge in a way that is connective as opposed to divisive?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all begins with just redistributing power and ownership. That's like at the top, right? Because the individuals who control the power then set the standard, and then the individuals who are coming in, right, as a user, as an audience, as an individual with less power, right, is then has to succumb to whatever has been said. And I think that if we build platforms and practices that give creators, not institutions, right, not organizations, not for-profit entities, nonprofit entities, whatever, right, control over their narratives, intellectual property, and the revenue that is generated from the extraction of the sort, that I believe personally, this will motivate deeper engagement from artists. It will cultivate more expansive trust, especially for those who are historically like have distrust media, right? For obvious reasons. It's like, I don't know about you. You're trying to scam me. I think that that's a great window into cultivating that trust. And so for me, and especially at OTV, our entire ecosystem, our entire framework has been built around holding that trust. And that's the only reason we've been able to be successful. That is the special sauce, right? If you take that away, then we literally have nothing. The fact that we're able to travel quite literally around the world several times over and do this work, and we continue to receive funding, we continue to receive support, and we continue to receive people showing up in a way that marries that both honesty and trust with also their vulnerability, but does not encourage them to perform either of them, I
Mm,
think is what is helping us center community over cloud, right? Because we're
mm,
not creating a scene, right? We're not creating like you're cool because it's like, no, we're developing protocols that are rooted in care, that are rooted in a cultural specificity, and I even I would see some collective accountability, right? There's
mm,
some pieces in there that are like, we're gonna hold up a mirror to you and we'll do this to ourselves as well. Okay.
mhm,
And so I think when people feel seen and they feel supported and they feel like the knowledge and the stories that they hold are building a language
mm,
that people can respond to and get behind, that to me transforms any vehicle. Because I think that media, social media, tech, all of those are just tools for me. And for me, storytelling specifically is as I mentioned before, truth telling, but it's heart's work, right? We're mending, right? We're not saving lives, we're enriching them. And I think
mm,
that sometimes we conflate the two, and the two don't have to go together, right? Like they can be separate, and they can be so generative to designing accessibility and agency for the people in the communities that want to benefit from these tools and these systems. And so I think for me in closing, what's important is prioritizing this this transparency that is needed, both offline to online connectivity, is what helps us reflect the realities of how communities are organizing and surviving today. Because like what happens online is not your daily, movement through the world. And I think that sometimes, again, we conflate the two, that like what happened online is real. It's like, I don't know. Like you had screens and monitors and all these things in front of you as a barrier between what is happening in your actual life. I don't know. Like I don't know. I really hold that. And so for me in my personal life, something I've been trying to really cultivate is right a public identity online, right, and a private life that is detached from that. And sometimes there's beautiful like layering that happens that feels so generative and expansive and like the deepest invitation to really question who I am and how I'm showing up in the world. And then sometimes I'm like, I do not know that bitch. Just I don't know who that lady is online, but I'm happy that you love her, and I'm so happy that you get to engage with that version of Elijah. That the real version is in at home in a bonnet, and that's great.
I mean, you're talking about making sure that you have ownership over your life, right? Like you can be vulnerable online in the ways that you choose, but you can't put it all out there because then you're giving that to the corporations for one, and then to everyone else's misinterpretation of what they think you are. And like that is not a way to show up brave in the world. I just love this call to ownership as a strategy. It makes me think about so many things. One is like it's a contractual thing with OTV, right? Like when we started, before we had real contracts and we just had our little letter of agreement, the first line was like, you own your work. Actually, you own your intellectual property. And then the second line was like, this is non-exclusive, which means you also own distribution, meaning like we're not your sole distributor. You can take it wherever you want. You can show it at a festival. You can sell it to HBO. We don't care. We just want a little piece of it and we want to hold it in this space. And that for me was very intentional because that's not what Hollywood does. They take your IP, it's all exclusive. And that's not what social media platforms do either. Like you might be able to use the IP that you put on social media in some way, but you don't own distribution. That's a machine that's distributing your work, right? So you don't know who sees it. You don't get to control the spaces that you show up in online. And that doesn't make people feel brave. It's terrifying, actually, when you think about it.
Absolutely.
So, I think that like we have to start thinking more expansively about ownership because without those two forms of ownership, people aren't going to feel ownership over their own
Hmm.
narratives. And
Hmm.
a culture where people don't feel like they own their own story is the culture we have, which is a toxic one, right? Basically.
Absolutely.
So thank you for so much for that. You mentioned protocols. Like these things are protocols, they are ways of operating. You know, I'm curious if you might, and you've already kind of talked about them, so maybe we're just going to vibe a little bit more about this cooking metaphor that you started with, because I've been writing about like the cookout as a cultural protocol that just Black people have always used to survive. And it's the same thing, right? Like you own your dish at the cookout, right? You bring the potato salad, how that tastes is on you. And if it's
Exactly.
really good, that's your recipe, and no one's going to take your recipe and bring your dish to the cookout, right? Like that would be a scandal. And talking about accountability, right? There would have to be accountability for that theft in a way that there is not accountability for that theft in other spaces, corporate spaces especially. Um, but yeah, I'm curious, like, because you are a host, you are a person who gathers space, you are an organizer in so many ways. What do you think about as the protocols that guide your practice to make sure that the people you're organizing, connecting with feel safe and secure in sharing their story?
Oh, I love this question so much. And I love the cooking metaphor because, yeah, I believe that there are so many recipes and so many different types of ingredients that are needed for this to be executed in a way that resonates with the people that you were trying to bring together and truly cultivate systems that are anchored and rooted in care. So I love this. I think for me, the first thing that comes up is that piece, and I'm going to pull at the thread a little bit more around trust and vulnerability. We need intentional spaces where people can show up as their full selves without um, you know, a fear of exploitation or erasure. I think that to me feels critical. And that means that we have to honor this ancestral practice of deep listening, right? Right. Not listening to respond,
Hmm.
not even oftentimes listening to engage, right? Just literally listening to receive. And that's hard, right? We need storytelling circles, right? Spaces where we literally are just convening together and allowing ourselves to practice vulnerability, not perform. Okay, there's a difference. And then I think there needs to be a deeper language expansion pack around consent, right? Because I think that sometimes we do this blanket consent around storytelling and around trust and vulnerability that we think carries us through in every room in every moment. And it's like we need to get into more of a cyclical way of engaging around consent so that vulnerability is met with protection and not performance, right? Because as soon as you lose my consent, then I am going to start performing for you because I'm like, I don't trust you. I'm not going to give you my juicy bits, right? Like I'm not going to give you all of that because like you have already, shown to me that you can't handle and hold it with care. I think the next like piece in terms of ingredients that come up for me are empathy and nuance. I think that many people in the storytelling realm, it's hard for us to hold all of the truths that exist at the same time. And I believe our communities thrive when we embrace stories that don't fit into any particular box, right? And I'm not talking so much about format or genre, but I just feel like they don't all make sense. I think for me, I've been really trying to celebrate the gift of non-closure, right? Where it's like, I don't need this to be buttoned up. I don't need a perfect ending. I don't need this to be met with the most expansive amount of clarity. I just need you to be in the practice of telling me what the truth is, right? And then I will receive whatever format that arrives. I think for me, rituals of reflection, witness, translation, and memory are so critical, whether it's food or song, or like we talked about before, the cultivation of a recipe, right? And then the practice of even sharing that with people. It helps us hold all those contradictions. Because, like you just said, like, you might have a beef with your auntie who continues to show up with the potato salad with all them raisins in it, but like you're still gonna allow your auntie to show up at the cookout and it's gonna sit there in that pot and then she's gonna take that pot home, right? Because she's sure not gonna leave it here with you, right? And I think that for me, that multiplicity without demanding resolution or like oversimplification is actually quite beautiful, right? It is really beautiful that you're like, thank you, Aunt Angelisa, for bringing this potato salad once again to this cookout. No, 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 we have so much food left. Please take it back, take it back, take it back. And then I think the final ingredient for me, and this is like, I think they're all quite critical, but I think this one for me is what's been top of mind as we move through the age of like in these times and now more than ever and all of that. And in this political climate, like I'm just doing a lot of questioning and a lot of accountability holding where I'm like, tell me more. Like, I'm not trying to create stories for people. And that's something I've been really working through in therapy is just like, no, 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 no. You finish the story. I want you to tell me what you actually are saying when you said that. Because I have my interpretation, but I really need you to close the gap for me because storytelling should not be static, right? It shouldn't just be this thing that's you share and then it ends. It should be a living process that is I believe rooted in self-inquiry, right? It should be like what we talked about before, that mirror holding. Um, and so when I'm thinking about these cultural protocols that center mutual responsibility and call and responses, these are traditions, right? That are rooted in a feedback loop, right? They're like
Mhm.
call and response, right? I'm telling you something, like you get to hold that however you need to. And it reminds us to share a story that we hold relationship to. And
Mhm.
for me, that thread is constantly being able to check in when we're talking about questioning is past, present, and future. And I think that's why memory is so important because it's like the first thing to go when um, times of conflict and chaos like emerge, it's like we kind of, it disorients us. We don't think about like all the things that we've lived through, all the things that we've endured, all the things that we've learned. It just kind of like fades away. And so I've been trying to call that back into the questioning practice.
Whew, you just said so much. That was amazing. I want to respond to so many things. I'm thinking about, let's start with questioning and memory. I feel like, one of the things that when you center memory, you realize that actually the past is also as evolving as the present, and that you can actually remember something and then hear something else, someone else's story, and that memory shifts, and you can actually change your past. You can actually change who you are, which is changing your relationship. But it is about that relationship between questioning the vulnerability to get into the messy of it, to not resolve it, to not try to resolve it, to let it hang out there. And I feel like our technologies don't enable that, right? Like on social media, it's like, this is my statement. It's hardwired and it's who I am, it's unchanging. And it's like, okay. And then I think even of when you said questioning, it made me think of like the comment feature and like because at academic conferences, there's always like, I have a question that's more of a comment, and then
Yeah.
they don't actually ask a question, they just say what they want to say, right? And it's just a form of call and response, I guess. But it's like, why we only have comments and we can't have like, actually, I have a question.
Hmm.
Like, let's actually tell me more. I'm interested. I'm curious. I want to engage in a meaningful way. I don't want to just say what I feel and then move on.
Right.
No one feels safe or brave in that context. That's also not like how people relate, like if you're actually in relationship with someone, you are doing that back and forth, right? You talked about the calm response tradition, which, in some ways people associate with gospel, but is also related to like the circles that hip hop was born in, or,
Right.
you know,
Ciphers, right. Yeah. Hmm.
ciphers. Yes, thank you. Or even susu, and we all put a little in,
Hmm.
we take out, like there is that back and forth that is how we've developed as humans. And it is also how we have connected and created space for vulnerability.
Right.
It sounds like that's how you practice. You're just like, when you create space, you're aware that that space is co-created
Hmm.
by everyone who's going to be there. And so they have to have agency to ask questions, to say, actually, I think this should be a little different, to bring their dish and then take it away.
Right.
Feel like you
But the
just
thing is that that's interesting about that though is like with social media, you don't have to do that. Like I can mute you, right? I can turn off comments. I can do like there is in real life you can't do that. Like you can't there's no mute button for you being in front of me. Like I can walk away, yes. Like I can like disengage from a conversation, but like I can't literally stop you from engaging with me in
Mhm.
reality. And I think that like there is something around there that like helps people feel and bolster up themselves in a different way when you know that like you can literally at any moment delete your account. You can you can be removed from the
You
platform.
can block people. You could literally disappear people.
You can disappear people, right? Like that is wild sauce to me. That like, yeah, that would then change the way that you are showing up. And I think that you make it so prevalent when you say like that statement, right? Because it's fixed. You can literally be like, here's my moment. I said what I said. And now respect my privacy at this.
Well, and those tools are there in part because these social media platforms are so open. They're open to the world. They are, in a lot of ways, necessary forms of protection for people. But I think what we do in space is we invite in people to our space. And there is a trust that comes by, like, there's a host who I know who is accountable to everyone in this space, and everyone in this space is accountable to themselves and everyone else.
Right.
And there's a soft porous border around that space that
Mhm.
allows people to speak and not feel like they're about to be disappeared or muted or shut up. And so there is something, like you said, structurally wrong with social media. It goes to profit, right? Everybody's invited because we need to make money.
Right.
That actually is like not how we keep people safe. That's how we make money from people, right? It's
Exactly. Very different.
very, very different. And I think when you talk about the in these times, etc., part of what we're grappling with is, these spaces are not made for the kind of liberatory, honest movements that we need to survive. the latest extension in the long history of colonialist extraction and exploitation and all the things, because I don't want to, like you said, forget about, I don't want to have like this time is different because no, it's
Right.
people, the world has ended for many communities around the world many times, particularly our
Several
communities.
times. Yes.
And yet we hear, not all of us, but we hear. So I want to conclude with a perhaps unfair but simple question. And that is, what is one specific thing, a cultural practice, a design feature, a platform policy that you love about social media and think should continue? And what is one thing that you would change?
One, I definitely should have reviewed these questions beforehand. But for someone who has not reviewed these questions beforehand, I'm eating it. Um, okay. Let's see. What is one thing? Okay. Okay. This is just top of mind, so we're gonna vibe.
Yeah, let's
We're
do it.
gonna I feel like for me, what's coming up is like relational metrics over vanity metrics.
Hmm.
And so if I was able to design a feature that prioritizes metrics over, or excuse me, relational metrics over vanity metrics, imagine like a platform where instead of like likes and follows and hearts and all of these things, we're tracking moments of care.
Ooh.
How many times did someone engage with the story, share it in the group chat, right? Move it into the classroom, create a curriculum around it, spread it to, their hateful auntie upstate. Like I want to see that, right? Started a conversation because of it. And then you were like awarded and like validated and affirmed by how much you care, right? Like that's what I'm looking at. You see what I'm saying?
I do see what you're saying. I can't believe you just came up with that in this moment because you answered both questions very well. The critique of the vanity metrics. I love the word vanity metrics. I don't know if you just came up with that or if that's actually something people say.
I've heard it said before. I mean,
Okay.
like, well, I haven't heard it in like there are like the vanity that comes with social media, but I'm calling them vanity metrics because I'm like, that's what it is. It's like you affirmed me because you thought my photo was cute, and that's vain.
Yeah. Yeah. And we get this dopamine rush from it, but it doesn't, over the long term, make us feel like, oh, we should connect. So why don't we redo metrics that
Mhm.
center the connection
Right.
and the complexity and intimacy of that connection and not the quantitative numbers that make us feel like big up ourselves, I think is just so very wise. And that is why you are, as you said, a visionary leader, because you literally just came up with that in this moment. I want to thank you again for taking time out of your Saturday to talk to me about social media technology and the ways that you navigate the world. It's truly been very enriching, and I think people will enjoy it. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. What a beautiful way to start my Saturday, and hopefully this is all landing with beautiful, expansive amounts of clarity for whomever is consuming out in the world. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
I have no doubt. Thank you.